I am Digimol Amaga.
I am Kyla Lloyd the Autentico.
Hi, I'm Monica Fides V.S.
Hi, I'm Charming Faith Artencillo.
Hello everyone. So for today, we're going to tackle about the elements of visual art. To formally start our discussion, I will introduce to you the elements of visual art. These are the line, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color. I will only discuss to you the two elements of it, which are the line and shape, while my group mates will discuss the other elements. Now let's start with the line. Do you have any idea what is a line? You see, line was defined as a mark with length and direction, a mark made by a moving point. It can be real or implied, can be long or short, can be solid or broken, can be thicker or thinner, can be straight, wavy, zigzag, bumpy, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, curved, bent, or spiral. These are some types of lines. You see, this is the horizontal line, the vertical line, the zigzag line, the curves, the curly. The curly is a little bit complicated than the curves. This is the spiral, the thick and the thin. These are the shapes, the angle, the cross-hatching, the ripple or radiating. This is the dots. These are the dots, and the scumbling. Now let's proceed to this one. This one is an example of an art. The artists have used the different kinds of lines to be able to create a masterpiece. Okay? Isn't it amazing that because of just using the different kinds of lines, then the artists were able to create such, and it is amazing, right? So now let's proceed with the next one, which is the shape. Do you have any idea what is a shape? Okay, a shape is the quality of a distinct object or body in having an external surface or outline of specific form or figure. Artists use all kinds of shapes. Geometric shapes are precise and regular, like squares, rectangles, and triangles. Now, these are some examples of shapes. This is the circle, ellipse, the oval, square, rectangle, trapezium, parallelogram, rhombus, kite. This is the triangle, right triangle, scaline triangle, the pentagon, hexagon, heptagon, octagon, nonagon, decagon, star, heart, the crescent, the cross, the pie, and the arrow. Now, this is an example of an art wherein the artists have used the different kinds of shapes. And like from the first picture, or should I say from the first art that I've shown to you a while ago, this one is also an example wherein an artist were able to create a masterpiece by simply using one of the elements of visual art, which is the shape. See, this is a triangle, circle, and a rectangle. There's a lot of it. So it is really useful to use the visual art or the elements of visual art. And I think that will be all for my discussion.
Hello guys, in this element, I will discuss to you the form as an element of visual art. So form is an element refers to a three-dimensional composition or within a three-dimensional composition. Like shape, form has length, width, but also has depth. When a shape acquires depth and becomes three-dimensional, then it takes on form. Cylinders, pyramids, and spheres are some of the more common forms, though they can also be amorphous. In sculpture, form is of the utmost importance, though it can easily be introduced into drawing and painting using 3D art technique. Three-dimensional form. Three-dimensional form can be modeled, carved, and constructed. It can be created from sculptural materials like clay, wax, plaster, stone, and many more. So form is also a big consideration in architecture, with acclaimed architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, Zaha Hadid, and Tadao Ando. And this is all for the form as an element of visual art.
So, we have here space. Space in an art can be defined as the area that exists between two identifiable points. The organization of space in art is referred to as composition and is an essential component of any work of art. Space is conceived of differently in each medium. The space in a painting, for example, includes the background, foreground, and middle ground, while three-dimensional space, just like for example the sculpture or installation, will involve the distance between, around, and within points of the work. So space is further categorized as positive or negative. So when we say positive, the positive space can be defined as the subject of an artwork, while the negative space can be defined as the space around the subject. So over the ages, space has been conceived of in various ways. Artists have devoted a great deal of time to experimenting with perspectives and degrees of flatness of the pictorial plane. So the perspective system has been a highly employed and convention in Western art. Visually, it is an illusionist phenomenon, well suited to realism and the depiction of reality as it appears. So after spending hundreds of years developing linear perspective, Western artistic conventions about the accurate depiction of space went through a radical shift at the beginning of 20th century, where the innovations of Cubism and subsequent modernist movements represented an important shift in the use of space within Western art, the impact of which is still being felt until today. So Cubism, when we say Cubism, it is an artistic artistic movement in the early 20th century, characterized by the depiction of natural forms as geometric structures of planes. So we have here two-dimensional space. Two-dimensional space or bidimensional space is a geometric model of the planar projection of the physical universe in which we live. So, two-dimensional space is a geometric model of the planar projection of the physical universe in which we live, as I have said earlier. So, the two dimensions are commonly called as the length and the width. Both directions lie in the same plane. So, in physics, our bidimensional space is viewed as a planar representation of the space in which we move. In art composition, drawing is a form of visual art that makes use of any number of drawing instruments to mark a two-dimensional medium, meaning that the object does not have depth. One of the simplest and most effective means of communicating visual ideas, the medium has been a popular and fundamental means of public expression throughout human history. Additionally, the relative availability of basic drawing instruments makes drawing more universal than most other media. So, measuring the dimensions of a subject while blocking in the drawing is an important step in producing a realistic rendition of a subject. Tools such as compass can be used to measure the angles of different sides. So these angles can be produced on the drawing surface and then rechecked to make sure they are accurate. Another form of measurement is to compare the relative sizes of different parts of the subject with each other. So, a finger is placed at a point along the drawing implement can be used to compare that dimension with other parts of the image. A ruler can be used both as a straightened and a device to compute proportions. When attempting to draw a complicated shape such as a human figure, it is helpful at first to represent the form at which a set of primitive shapes. So almost any dimensional form can be represented by some combination of the cube, sphere, cylinder, and cone. Once these basic shapes have been assembled into likeness, then the drawing can be refined into a more accurate and polished form. The lines of the primitive shapes are removed and replaced by the final likeness. So a more refined art of figure drawing relies upon the artist possessing a deep understanding of anatomy and human proportions. So next we have here linear perspective and three-dimensional space. Perspective is an approximate representation on a flat surface of an image as it is seen by the eye. So it is calculated by assuming a particular vanishing point. So what do we mean by vanishing point? So vanishing point is a point in a perspective drawing at which parallel lines receding from an observer seem to converge. So that is what we mean by vanishing point. So systematic attempts to evolve a system of perspective are usually considered to have begun around the 5th century BCE in the art of ancient Greece. By the later periods of antiquity, Artists, especially those in less popular traditions, were well aware that distant objects can be shown smaller than those close at hand for increased illusionism. But, however, whether this convention was actually used in a work depended on many factors. Some of the paintings found in the ruins of Pompeii show a remarkable realism and perspective for their time. So, a drawing has one point perspective when it contains only one vanishing point on the horizontal line. This type of perspective is typically used for images of roads, railway tracks, hallways, or buildings viewed so that the front is directly facing the viewer. Any objects that are made up of lines either directly parallel with the viewer's line of sight or directly perpendicular can be represented with one-point perspective. And then we have here two-point perspective. It is used to draw the same objects as one-point perspective, but rotated, such as looking at the corner of a house or looking at two forked roads shrink into the distance. So, for example, in looking at the house from the corner, one wall would recede towards one vanishing point, rotated, such as looking at the corner of a house or looking at two forked roads shrink into the distance. So, for example, in looking at the house from the corner, one wall would recede towards one vanishing point and the other wall would recede towards the opposite vanishing point. So that's how we use the two-point perspective. And then another one is the three-point perspective. So it is used for buildings depicted from above or below. In addition to the two vanishing points from before, one for each wall, there is now a third one for those walls recede into the ground. So the third vanishing point would be below the ground. And then the last perspective is a 4-point perspective. So it is the curvilinear variant of two-point perspective. So what do we mean by curvilinear? Having bends or curved formed by curved lines. So that's what we mean by curvilinear, having bends or curved line. So the resulting elongated frame can be used both horizontally and vertically. Like all other foreshortened variants of perspective, 4-point perspective starts off with a horizontal line, followed by 4 equally spaced vanishing points to delineate 4 vertical lines. Because vanishing points exist only when parallel lines are present in the scene, a perspective with no vanishing points occurs if the viewer is observing a non-rectilinear scene. So the most common example of a nonlinear scene is a natural scene. For example, a mountain range, which is frequently does not contain any parallel lines. It is a perspective without vanishing points, can still create a sense of depth. So next we have distortions of space and foreshortening. So what do we mean by distortion? Distortion is used to create various representations of space in two-dimensional works of art. So, a distortion is the alteration of the original shape or other characteristic of an object, image, sound, or other form of information or representation. So, distortion can be wanted or unwanted by the artist. It is usually unwanted when it concerns physically degradation of a work. But however, it is more commonly referred to in terms of perspective, where it is employed to create realistic representations of space in two-dimensional works of art. So we have here perspective projection distortion. So it is the inevitable misrepresentation rather of three-dimensional space when drawn or projected onto a two-dimensional surface. So it is impossible to accurately depict three-dimensional reality on a two-dimensional plane. However, there are several constructs available that allow for seemingly accurate representation. The most common of this perspective projection. So, perspective projection can be used to mirror how the eye sees by making use of one or more vanishing points. So, that's what perspective projection is all about. So, next, let's define the word foreshortening. Foreshortening is a visual effect or optical illusion that causes an object or distance to appear shorter than it actually is because it is angled toward the viewer. So, although foreshortening is an important element in art where visual perspective is being depicted, foreshortening occurs in other types of two-dimensional representations of three-dimensional scenes. So, for example of that is the oblique parallel projection drawings. Yes, that. So, a method for presenting foreshortened geometry systematically into a plane surface was known for another 300 years. The artist Giotto may have been the first to recognize that the image beheld by the eye is distorted. To the eye, parallel lines appear to intersect, like the distant edges of a path or road, whereas in undistorted nature, they do not. So, many of the mentioned artists, the artist Giotto, his paintings or perspective is employed to achieve various distortion effects.
So the next element of art is the texture. So texture is the surface character of an object. It refers to the surface quality in a work of art, to the way an object feels to touch or looks as it may feel if it were touched. So there are three basic types of texture. First is the actual, second is the visual, and third is the simulated texture. So actual texture or tactile or real, in other words, is the way the surface of an object actually feels through its roughness or smoothness of a surface. So examples would be are sandpaper, cotton balls, tree bark, and poppy fur. Second is the visual texture. Visual is the illusion of texture on a flat surface. This is the type of texture that artists render when they draw and paint. Visual textures may look soft, smooth, or fuzzy, or even rough, even to the point of trompe-l'oeil, the French phrase that means trick the eye. So simulated texture is the type that is created to look like something it is not. It may look rough, smooth, or any other feel but is purely made up by the artist. For example, in drawing or painting of a cat where its fur is made to look like real fur.
And we're going to tackle one of the elements of art, value. So, what is value? Value is one of the seven elements of art. Value deals with the lightness or darkness of a color. Since we see object and understand object because of how dark or light they are, then value is incredibly important to art. We have here eight types of shading that applies to object based on values. So, first is the hatching. Hatching is a technique when you simply let your lines travel together to create dimension. Cross hatching is the same lines as we did with hatching. Cross hatching is exactly what the name suggests, cross the lines. Random cross hatching is just the same with hatching and cross hatching. Stippling. Stippling is your goal to express the gradation of value with dots, dots, and more dots. And just like with the other shading techniques, the density of your dots will dictate the value throughout your subject matter. Squiggle or scribbling is an excellent technique to use when drawing specific subject like trees or hair because it not only creates values but also transmits a sense of texture. Linear. It allows your lines to taper into comet tails. Space your lines evenly and adjust value by changing the space of the parallel lines. Avoid right angles in cross-hatching. Geometric. 8 is the traditional. And lastly, the straight line. So, that's all.
So the last element of art is color. Color is the quality of an object or substance with respect to light reflected by the object, usually determined visually by measurement of hue, saturation, and brightness of the reflected light. Saturation or chroma, hue, the natural appearance of the skin, especially of the face complexion. So in other words, color is the visual sensation resulting from the reflection of wavelength of light from differing surface. So color also can add interest and reality to an artwork. So the use of a color wheel helps us to understand color theory more effectively. So you can see in the screen that picture is the triadic color wheel or the triadic color scheme. It uses colors that are evenly spaced around the color wheel. It uses three colors that are equally spaced apart on the color wheel. So the Newton and the color spectrum. Our modern understanding of light and color began with Isaac Newton in year 1642 to 1726 and a series of experiments that he published in year 1672. So Isaac Newton was the first to understand the rainbow and he used a prism to refract white light into its component colors. So you can see the picture in the screen, that's the prism. So there are seven colors. These colors are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and the violet. So you remember the anagram Roy G. Biv? So there are three properties of color. First is the hue, the color name or the shade. Second, the value, the lightness or darkness of the color. So the lightest in value is the color yellow and the darkest in value is the color violet. So third properties of color is the intensity, the saturation of color, purity, chroma, brightness, or dullness. So the color pigments. So there are three primary colors which is red, yellow, and blue. So these color pigments are primary for two reasons. So first reason is they can't be made by mixing. So the second reason is that they can be mixed to make all the other colors on the color wheel. So next is the secondary colors. So when you mix two primary colors together, you get a secondary color. For example, the red and yellow, so the result is orange. So red and blue, the result is violet. And yellow and blue, then the result is color green. So orange, violet, green is the secondary colors. So next is the intermediate colors. So you mix a primary and secondary color together so you get an intermediate colors. For example, the red and orange, so you get red orange. Yellow and green, so yellow green. Blue and green, so blue green. Red and violet, so you get red violet. Yellow and orange, so the intermediate colors is yellow orange. So that's the intermediate colors, the red orange, yellow green, blue green, red violet, and the yellow orange. So the color relationships, the warm and cool. So warm colors are those that have reds, yellow, and oranges. So warm colors seem to advance or come forward in an artwork. So cool is the colors. Colors are those that have blues, greens, and violets. So cool colors seem to recede or more backward in an artwork. So next, colors are expressive. Colors can convey in emotion and feelings. So blue is calming, red is exciting or passionate, and yellow is energizing. So it is important that artists understand the effects of color when they are trying to get the viewers of their art to feel a particular way. So that's the color.